Life is a gamble, we scramble for money. I might crack a smile, but ain't a damn thing funny.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to yet another college football video. Uh, how y'all been, man? I've been good. I've been chilling. Uh, I didn't think of an intro before I started this shit, so uh today we got the first part of a small series. I just want to stop making like 45-minute, 50-minute long videos to be honest. I'm just trying to cut them up in smaller pieces so they're easier to record, make, edit, all that shit. And I have more videos to make in the future because if I take a 50-minute video, break the shit into three parts, it's a lot easier on my part shit. So let's get right into it. Today we got the first part of my personal most disappointing teams list. So it's only two teams on here for the first part. So let's get right into it, man. Starting off is going to be North Carolina. This shit hurt for me personally. I'm not saying I'm a fan or anything, but I was really rooting for them, man. They were an exciting team. I thought they were going to be really good to start the season. They were. I mean, they started off red hot. The offense was exciting, it was explosive, and the defense was a storyline of the improvement, especially early on against South Carolina and Minnesota. Like they were showing out. And it was like it was some thought processes going around for me at least. Like North Carolina has a shot. Like they were a top 10 team and they were like a top 8 or 9 team for me at one point. So they just crashed and burned so hard. And then also the Devontae Walker situation, I was following that very close. And so when he finally got to play and he was balling out, that's just another like feel good storyline, something like that. So it's just I was really rocking with North Carolina this year, and it all came crashing down. So let's get into that, man. Why were they one of the most disappointing teams this year? First of all, let's compare the stats. From last year to this season, you can take a look right there. Obviously, Drake May last season, they were a dangerous offense. And but so it was mainly just Drake May trying to carry the team on his back because if I'm not mistaken, no, I'm not mistaken. He was their leading passer, obviously, but he was also their leading rusher by a wide margin. They didn't have a running back who was really putting in, you know, their fair share into the offense. That completely changed this year. We're going to get into who exactly that was, but they had a guy this year who was shouldering the load. They had a top 20 passing and running game in the country, which meant that they were sixth in the country in yards per game, which is you know, extremely high. I mean, 30 more yards per game than last season. They ran for 40 yards a game more than the year before. That is a massive improvement. Points per game was like the exact same. The issue being though, and this is the confusing part, is obviously when your rushing attack is that good and you're top 20 in the country in rushing yards, how is it possible that you're allowing your star quarterback to hit the turf so often, 37 sacks allowed, and how do you turn it over more than you did the year before when your run game is so much better than that's just baffling to me because you would think when you have to pass more often, it leads to more turnovers, strip sacks, interceptions, all that. But if you're running the ball more effectively, then theoretically turnovers should go down. Not the case with UNC. They turned it over 3 more times than they did the year before. But defensively, you can see there was clearly some improvements there. I mean, 35 less yards per game allowed, passing yards, a stark, or what's the word I'm looking for? A staunch increase. That don't make sense. A large increase in their pass defense at UNC. Rushing yards allowed about the same. They weren't very good against the run, but points per game, they allowed 4 less points per game. That's impressive. Last season they could not for the life of them get after the quarterback. They did this year, not incredibly well, but they were middle of the pack, To go from god awful to middle of the pack, I think that's a pretty big improvement. And then 22 takeaways. That is not anything to scoff at right there. That's impressive. It's kind of like a USC situation from last season, a team that's not really good overall defensively, but they take the ball away. So if you're just looking at the stats right here, you'd say, okay, they got a top 15 to top 10 offense in the whole country. They turn it over a little too often. Their defense isn't great, but at least they get takeaways. This team should be a lot better than what they were, just looking at the pure team statistics. Getting into the player by player thing, let's look at the offense first. Omarion Hampton was that guy this year. And I have not heard a lot of people give him his credit. In my opinion, Omarion Hampton was the best running back in the country. I'll give you Ollie Gordon. Blake Corum was he was good. Um, Alshon Jeanty, Corey Schrader, Audric Estime, guys like that. But for my money, Omarion Hampton, he was the best running back in my opinion this season. Over 1,700 yards from scrimmage, 16 touchdowns, almost 6 yards per carry. Like he burst onto the scene and he didn't slow down. There wasn't a lull for Omarion at any point in this season. But if you look at Drake May's stats up here at the top, this is the interesting thing to me. Now, there was a change at offensive coordinator at UNC. I think it was Phil Longo last year. I think he went to Wisconsin. I don't know who their OC is now, but clearly it had an impact. It had an impact in a good way in that they were able to really establish a run game and get a guy like Omarion Hampton the touches he needed to be dominant this year. But Drake May's stats, it really doesn't make sense. Obviously, you lose a guy like Josh Downs, right? So you lose a number one receiver. You also lost your number two receiver last year in Antoine Green. So you lose your top two receivers, but I feel like you bring in other guys to be good pass catchers. But Drake May's stats, and let's not pretend that 4,000 yards and 33 touchdowns is bad or anything, but 1,000 yard decrease with a better run game. Like if he would have totaled two or 300 less yards. That would be understandable, right? He's running the ball less because he doesn't have to. A more controlled, more balanced offense, but 1,000 less. That's kind of shocking. 12 less touchdowns and more inter. That's the thing that really scares me. More turnovers when you have to do a lot less because you have so much of an improved run game. So their passing game was disappointing this year, inarguably. Um, Devontae Walker obviously missed a bunch of time due to his ridiculous just situation with the NCAA. If he would have, man, I wish he would have played a whole year, man. His stats would have been off the chain. But almost 700 yards, seven touchdowns in the games he did play. J.J. Jones at the bottom there, kind of turning into the new Antoine Green. When Walker was in there, he was the number one. He was the number one receiver. Then you had a whole list of guys who were also contributing. Bryson Nesbitt, Nate McCullum, but J.J. Jones was the clear number two this season. So offensively, man, it's hard to say it was disappointing because they were a top 10 offense in the country, arguably. But when they needed it, it wasn't what you were hoping for. Defensively, let's take a look at some of these guys. Um, like I said, there was improvement. There was improvement defensively. It's hard not to improve when you were so awful last season. Their linebacking duo here, Cedric Gray, Power Echols, each over 100 tackles. Cedric Gray, he's a damn good player. I don't know if he's going to the NFL, but he should because I mean he's a real he stuffs the stat sheet. He does everything for this UNC defense. Kamon Rucker kind of came on strong as their premier edge rusher. 15 TFLs, 8.5 sacks. Those are really good numbers. He had a couple of games where he really just took over. He was their best, defensive lineman without a doubt. They had a couple DBs leave in the transfer portal, and the best one remaining, you could say, just statistically, was Elijah Huzzy. 6 passes defended, 3 interceptions. Ah, defensively, I wouldn't say you didn't have the talent to really put together a good defense, I'd say. But the potential was there, and they were showing up early and often. Like I said, the first couple games of the season, they looked like a brand new team. But as the season wore on, as we're gonna get to, it all fell apart, man. Let's get into it, man. Oh, this hurts to watch. So. Game one against South Carolina. A lot of people picked South Carolina that game. There were not a lot of people saying that UNC was going to win that game, but they did. Got themselves ranked. And then, you know, App State, that was a very, really close game. It went to overtime. App State won the Sun Belt, didn't they? No, Troy did. Troy did. But App State was a good team this year. App State just beat somebody in the bowl game that, they probably weren't even favored to beat. So App State, in hindsight, was a pretty good team. Should you have gone to overtime with them? Probably not, but a win is a win. Minnesota, that's a game right there where I was saying the defense really showed up. Minnesota just played and won a bowl game. Um, and then Pitt, another good win. ACC opponent, Syracuse. This is Devontae Walker's first game. And this is the point where I was like, dang it. UNC's putting it, they got Walker back. They've scored 30 plus every single game going into Miami. this is a team that's red hot, and then they beat Miami, put up 40 on them. This is when I was really starting to say, "Oh my goodness, UNC is going to meet Florida State in the ACC championship game, and it's going to be a shootout." That did not happen because then they fucking lost to Virginia. That just you didn't see it, but that just sent chills down my spine, man. That game was crushing, man, because I was on the UNC hype train because I was pushing the hype train. And then they lost to Virginia, man. And you knew it was going to happen, right? If you followed UNC, you knew that it was good. It was too good. Things were going too well. And at a certain point, they were going to drop a game to an ACC opponent that their league's better than. And it just happened to be Virginia. But that's not all, because next week they gave up 46 to Georgia Tech. Oh my God. Georgia Tech, by the way, 2 weeks ago also knocked off undefeated Miami. So Georgia Tech just playing spoiler for a bunch of teams this year. That was a nail in the coffin, right? The Virginia loss you can still salvage. Like they were still ranked in the top 20 after the loss. So you could have still salvaged something, right? Like if you would have beat Georgia Tech and then won your next two, obviously, you probably would have been what, top 12, top 13 by the time you got to Clemson. So, but I mean, yeah, they beat up on Campbell. Duke, this game, you don't even understand. Duke didn't even have Riley Leonard this game. This was Duke's backup quarterback who put up 45 points on North Carolina. This is when I really just knew that the defense was not fixed. It was more of the same, and there was going to be a dark couple of games coming up. They lost to Clemson. At this point, I had no faith in UNC. I kind of expected that. Clemson just owns North Carolina, to be honest. I beat them last year in the ACC championship game, and this year a weak Clemson, supposedly good UNC, still didn't matter. Clemson wins by double digits. And then NC State dogs them, owns them, outfit more physical, wanted it more. UNC gave up at this point in the season. And then the bowl game versus West Virginia, no Drake May, they didn't even show up. It's just such a man, such a crappy way to end the year. For look at those first 6 games, man. Oh man. And we're looking at this hindsight, you look at and they played two ranked teams, right? Duke was ranked at a time, but they didn't have that quarterback that game. Clemson, obviously, extremely weak in season. They lost to Virginia and Georgia Tech, two of the worst teams in the ACC. You got to win those games, man. Let's think about this, man. If they would have won those games, right, they would have been top 10 against Georgia Tech, probably top 8 or 9. After the Campbell, 8 or 9. After the Duke win, they would have been a top 6 or 7 team in the country, probably, by the time they played Clemson. And you can't tell me that if that would have happened, that they wouldn't have won that game because they would have had so much momentum behind them. They probably lose to NC State either way, but maybe not. But it's like UNC, even if you win one of those games versus Virginia or Georgia Tech, it's man, it's disgusting, man. It's horrible the way UNC put together. They just wasted 2 years of Drake May, man. They wasted 2 years of Drake May. They wasted an All-American season from Omarion Hampton. They wasted Devontae Walker. No, I'm disgusted, man. Just looking at this shit, man. They crashed and burned in the worst way possible, and it hurt to watch, man. I gotta move on. This shit, this shit just made me depressed. Next up, we got Miami, the U. Now, you may look at this and you may say, if you didn't keep up with Miami this season, you may say, well, Rod, they won 2 more games than the year before. How could they possibly be one of the most disappointing teams in the entire country? That, my friend, is a sign that you were not keeping up with Miami this year. Preseason, this team was pegged as a dark horse in the ACC, a lock for 8 or 9 wins. And if they beat A&M, the word was that they were going to put together a very, very good season. They beat A&M, and they did not put together a very, very good season. Now, let's give some credit where credit is due. I give Dion in Colorado so much credit for winning 3 more games than they did the year before. So I have to give Miami and Mario Cristobal some credit for winning 2 more games. Improvement is improvement, no matter the state or level or whatever. So there we go. That's the clap for them winning 2 more games than the year before. Let's get into it now. Offensively, they took a big jump. They took a massive jump offensively. Just look at the stats across the board. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, what's that? Like almost 70 more yards per game, almost 50 more rushing yards per game. It's a massive improvement offensively, right? Across the board, a better run game. They had some really, really good receivers this year. I'll say that. They had a receiving core this year that was ready to contend. Honestly, I mean, you had 1,000 yard receiver, a guy who was close to 1,000 yard receiver, and then your third receiver was damn good. So it's like they had the weapons outside. You could say their offensive line was talented enough. The run game, I mean, top 50 pass hand run game. Neither one of those they excelled in, but having top 50 in both is impressive. Top 30 in yards per game, um, over 30 points per game scored. You didn't let I mean, that's the look at that improvement. I don't know if there's any team in the country that would have allowed 20 less sacks than the year before. That is impressive. And then defensively, again, it's improvements across the board defensively, right? If you would just look at the stats, right? I mean, look at it, 35 less rushing yards per game, 4 less points per game allowed, right? The sacks per game that went down, takeaways down. But if you would just look at the stats offensively and defensively, you would say, man, this team must have won 4 or 5 or at least 3 or 4 more games than the year before. Nope, did not happen. Did not happen. While there was noticeable improvement, it did not show up in the wins and loss column as you think it should have. And that is why Miami is on this list. Let's get into it. Van Dyke was a bust. I think that's clear as day. They tried to bring in a new offensive coordinator to save him, and he wasn't up to the task. He got benched. Then the guy they benched him for outplayed him, I think. Then he got hurt, so Van Dyke had to come back in after he was already benched and his confidence was shot, and he just continued to sneak it up. 12 interceptions, 20 touchdowns. He wasn't good enough, right? People were singing his praises early in the season, but when the time came to play good competition, he folded, right? Simple as that. Henry Parrish, they did not have a lead running back who really was dominant this season or last season. It was Henry Parrish both times, and he wasn't bad. He had 6.3 yards per carry, but this team probably threw the ball too much when they should have leaned way more into their stable of running backs. With that being said, you can't argue with the receiving stats here. Xavier Restrepo over 1,000 yards with multiple quarterbacks thrown to him, 6 touchdowns, 85 catches. That's a good player. That's a damn good player in Xavier Restrepo. And then Jacoby George had a couple monster games. I mean, over 800 yards, 8 touchdowns. Again, 2 quarterbacks. The receiving core is there. That's inarguable. Should say 2023 here at the very bottom. I messed that up. But I mean, offensively, I feel like the talent was there. You can make the argument that you should have stuck with Van Dyke. You either stick with him the whole way through, or you put the backup in Emory Williams earlier than you did. It's just when you give up on your quarterback and you bench your quarterback, the season it's hard to salvage that, right? You made a mistake. You picked the wrong guy at QB. You got to live with that, and it's tough to rebound from that in the middle of the season. So they messed that up. They fucked that up. But defensively, it was a good defense, to be honest with you. I mean, they got a lot of guys here, namely Cam Kitchens. Um, 11, 11 picks in a 2 year stretch is ridiculous, by the way. But they got Francisco Mayuaga, pardon me, but they got him as a transfer portal out of Washington State. He just lit up the stat sheet. 82 tackles, 18 TFL, 7.5. This guy was a monster. Like they were a good unit defensively. I mean, let's go back to the stats real quick. You can see, you know, top 20 or top 25 in multiple categories. Top 20 in sacks, top 15 in rushing yards allowed, top 25 in total yards allowed, top 60 in everything. Like this was a good unit. This was the top 20 or 25 defense in the country. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make up for the turnovers offensively. Um, it's just, it's tough. It's tough when you bench your quarterback. I'm trying not to put so much of the blame on Van Dyke, but it's hard. Like I said, if you give up on your quarterback midway through a season, that's a massive mistake that it's hard to recover from. Looking at their season as a whole here, similar to UNC, they started off incredibly hot. That win over Texas A&M, look at their offense, guys. These first 4 games, they scored at least 38 points every game. In Miami of Ohio, that's the MAC champions. So laugh at that if you will, but Miami of Ohio is a double-digit win team and the champions of their conference. So to beat them 38-30, that's low key one of their best wins of the season. Okay. They beat Miami of Ohio. They beat the MAC champions. They beat ranked A&M with their starting quarterback who was healthy at the time. So I think they actually kind of low key deserve to be ranked there. They beat Clemson. They had a couple wins. The problem is, let's get into the Georgia Tech game. If you are unaware, of what happened that night at Georgia Tech. Maybe it was in Miami, actually. I don't even remember. But Mario Cristobal single-handedly lost Miami the game against Georgia Tech. If you're not aware of what happened, um, Miami had to kneel the ball to win the game. That was the task, and they failed to do that. You know why? Because Mario Cristobal made them run the ball when you needed to knee the ball. All you had to do, kneel the ball, clock runs out, you win the game. Miami ran the ball and fumbled, and then Georgia Tech came back, won the game. There were players crying on the sideline afterwards. They know what just happened. They knew what just happened. Their coach single-handedly fucked them out of a win when they were 4-0, when they were red hot. Yeah, the game was bad. They deserved to lose that game probably anyways, but you could have escaped with a win. And you would have went into UNC top 15 matchup. Instead, you blow the game versus Georgia Tech. You lose the game to UNC and your season's effectively over. You beat Clemson, you beat Virginia. That's a good way to bounce back. Honestly, I thought Miami was going to go on a roll of losses, but they bounced back and fought and scraped out a win versus Clemson, which I'm sure felt great for them. But then 6 points versus, and this is the height of Van Dyke's struggles here. 6 points against NC State. Then they bench him. They go to Emory Williams against Florida State. Emory Williams gets hurt versus Florida State. By the way, this is a healthy Jordan Travis, Florida State, who they kept it close against with two quarterbacks. Okay, so shout out to them. In FSU, I believe it was. They fought against Florida State. They fought against Louisville, a top 10 team. If you look at their schedule, they played number 12, number 4, number 10. They played Clemson, they played A&M, they played the MAC champions. Like this is not an easy schedule in hindsight, but it's just and then you beat Boston College and you lose to fucking Rutgers in the bowl game. Like, come on. But if you look at this schedule right here, obviously you got to beat Georgia Tech, right? You got to beat Georgia Tech, and you have to steal a win versus Florida State or Louisville when they're both one-score games. Like you just have to. If you want to be any type of good, right, you got to steal one of those games. You can't lose to Rutgers either, but that's a whole different thing. So if they would have beat Georgia Tech and stolen one of those games, then you're a 9-win team. You're certainly ranked by the end of the year, and the perspective is completely different right now. But I mean, that didn't happen. Even if you would have just stole one of those games, let's be honest with each other now. That Georgia Tech game completely ruined everybody's opinion. The way people switched on Mario Cristobal after that game was hilarious, but I'm here for it because he's a fraud. He single-handedly lost them a game, and I have a tough time believing that anybody there has any confidence. Look at the fall off with the offense though, right? So you have 4 straight games of at least 38 points, 3 straight games of 40. Georgia Tech, you lay an egg. You just completely shit the bed. Against North Carolina, you put up 31. Against Clemson, less than 30. Against Virginia, less than 30. NC State, 6. Florida State, less than 30. Louisville, 31. Cool. Boston. So you can say against Louisville and Boston College, they kind of found their groove again. They went through a lull offensively after starting off red hot. So, man, a lot of people are just unhappy with Miami right now. They're talking about fire the OC, fire Cristobal. Obviously, you have to go look for a new quarterback. Maybe you get one in the transfer portal. Maybe it's Emory Williams. Who knows? But it's just, you know, the way the reason Miami's really on this list. It's the way that they were so high, right? After the A&M win, you're 4-0. You're ranked in the top 20. You're ahead of schedule, right? In a lot of people's eyes. They didn't think Miami would start off that well. And then you blow the game versus Georgia Tech and you just free fall. You just free fall. You lose 4 out of your last 5. You lose to Rutgers. They fell flat on their face after showing people what they could be. And it's tough to watch. Not for me. I'm not a Miami fan, but it's just if you're a fan of football, watching the way they squandered their opportunity this season, it hurt, man. It hurt. It hurt. It's gonna be a lot of depression in this series, but I'm here for it, man. Teams got to get called out when they choke their seasons like Miami and in North Carolina did this year. But that's gonna be it for this video. Like I said, trying to keep these videos a little shorter, a little more digestible for y'all. But leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
It's out the motherfucking pack. Right out the But niggas don't know how to act.